Are we actually ready to go? Okay, great. Well, time flies there. That last half hour getting ready, I had great conversations. Hopefully many of you also had great conversations. It's part of the mingling that we wanted you all to do, and there'll be plenty of time for that later in the day as well. My name is David Karlbach. I am responsible for international programs at the World Trade Center Utah. And the World Trade Center Utah, as probably most of you know, is in the business of helping connect Utah to the world. We want to lower barriers. We want to create opportunities for people to think more about international trade and investment, and then actually help you engage in international trade and investment with our services that include helping you identify markets, develop plans to enter those markets, and then execute on those plans. This event today is like right in the bullseye of what World Trade Center does. I'm so thankful to our partners at JETRO as well as at the Japanese consulate for helping us with this event. And it should be a great opportunity for you to hear about generally doing business between Japan and Utah, but also to hear from some great panelists about how they've actually done that with respect to selling in Japan, with respect to joint ventures with Japanese companies, with respect to actually being acquired by a large Japanese conglomerate, among other things. And so it should be quite educational, and we've got plenty of time, as I mentioned, for mingling and for you to get to know each other and to get to know our guests today. I think without further ado, I'm going to, Franz, turn it to you for a second to say a few words as well of welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Franz Kolber with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. I'm the Director for International Trade and Diplomacy. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Governor's Office. I'm so grateful to have our friends from JETRO here again, and also we are very grateful for the Honorable Yoichi Mikami, the Consul General of Japan. The Governor's Office is committed to international trade, and we are delighted to focus today on Japan. We have great trade relations. We'll talk about that a little bit here in the next hour or so, and some real great success stories. With this, I just a very warm welcome everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Franz. So I think we're also going to turn the mic over to Consul General Mikami. You could step up and say also a few words of welcome, and then we'll turn to our panel discussion. Thank you.
Karlbach-san, thank you very much. Kolb-san, thank you very much. And Tak-san, thank you very much. I make my remarks very short because you are not interested in my ceremonial remarks. Anyway, but this is a great opportunity. I try to learn as much as possible today too. So let's start. Thank you very much.
All right, so today's event, we titled Building a Bullet Train for Trade and Investment Between Japan and Utah. And for our first panel, we wanted to talk about the macro environment. We're then going to hear from JETRO to talk about specifically their role and how they help with trade between Utah, or between the US, between the world really, and Japan. And then we're going to have a panel hearing from leaders of companies, both from Japan and here in Utah, who are actually doing business with Japan and have had great success and been able to take advantage of the opportunities that a partner like Japan represents. So our first panel is on business and investment environment. I was going to have each panelist introduce himself briefly, and then we'll turn to some Q&A that we've planned, and then open it up if we have time for Q&A during this session. Then we'll have Q&A as well at the end. So lots of time for questions, I hope. So to start with, maybe we could just start with you, Jun, with a brief introduction on your role. And then we'll just go down the table, and then I'll start with other questions. Thanks.
Hi, thank you, Don. So my name is Jun Ohara. It's a Japanese name. I've been in the US for the last 10 years, working for JP Morgan in New York. And I'm part of a team within the commercial bank that is focused on serving the financial needs of foreign-owned countries. And we have fairly significant number of customers, 2,000 overall. And whether surprising or not, 1/4, about 25% of these companies are Japanese. So that's very important part of our business. And I cover them nationally. So really thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much for coming. Really happy to have you here. June came all the way from New York to join this event, so we're very grateful for that. Thank you. Garrett.
I'm Garrett Vanderliden. I'm with the Economic Development Corporation of Utah, or EDC Utah. We specialize in corporate recruitment, bringing high-paying jobs and capital investment into the state. And so we have a frontline view as to what's going on when it comes to investment here in the state and what the future we're able to look at what the future may look like. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully you got June's card as representative of JP Morgan and 2,000 companies. He should be a good partner to EDCU. Thank you.
Well, I guess I introduced myself, but let me just say a few words, if I can,
Sure.
about Utah-Japan relations. I would like to, I have been in my position for, this is now my 6th governor administration. And I need to tell you that Japan has always played a very important role in economic relations between Utah and that very important part of the world. Every governor that I have worked for has been on a trade mission to Japan. And what we in Utah love is also have been these bilateral relations. We have had many Japanese companies that came over here to invest in Utah, to collaborate with Utah companies, and we will hear about some of the examples today. I'm very grateful. I mentioned JETRO before, which is the Japanese External Trading Organization, which is one of the most visionary organizations in international economic development. We have several individuals here that have benefited from JETRO. We have, for example, Mr. David Morel here, who is also the Honorary Consul of Luxembourg, who years ago started out with the help of JETRO in Japan. And so, and I'd just like to mention what is very important here is networking. We all know when it's international relations. And I want to make sure that one of the most important part of this meeting after the talks are done and so on and so forth is the networking and follow-up that goes on. One caution I need to tell our Utah companies with doing business with Japan is, when it comes to quality, is top quality. It is, one needs to be very, very, very careful when you send products over there that they are of the best quality. You'll get a fair price, and many times we've seen challenges, and that's where JETRO has come in to a certain extent to help companies, mentor them a little bit as they would go over there. I am so grateful. These Japanese-Utah relations have been now going on for decades, and I'd just like to mention 2 names of individuals that have, from the governor's office side, helped in that. And there's one gentleman by the name of Mr. Dan Maybe, who many years ago was laying the groundwork for these wonderful economic relations. And another gentleman by the name of Darren Cobbler, some of you might remember, who also was one of the individuals that has swung the flag of Utah, of Japan, here in Utah, and the opposite as well. We will continue. Utah is committed to doing business with Japan. Japan-Utah relations are important to our economy. We have a positive trade balance. So, for example, we export $714 million to Japan, and we import about $170 million. So, and I remember I used to work many years ago with Ernst & Young, and some of my first successful deals that we put together was with companies, with Daifuku. And so we are very, very grateful for our friends from Japan. So, Mr. Consul General, we are grateful for your country, for for you, the kind people, the very warm welcome we have always received when we were there, and we want to make sure we will reciprocate that for a long, long time to come. Thank you very much. Tom arigato.
All right. Thank you, Franz. And John, if you could say a few words of introduction.
Yes, thanks, David. So my name is John Huber. I'm an attorney here in Salt Lake City. My background is, as I worked for many, many years for the United States government in the Justice Department. I was the presidential appointee by President Obama and followed by President Trump as the United States attorney here in Utah. And since I have entered private practice, I've joined the law firm of Greenberg Traurig, which is a mouthful either in English or Japanese. So it's much easier to say GT. And GT, I'm very excited to join this team. It's a global law firm with an office here in Salt Lake. I'm your guy to come to, and I can introduce you to my friends and colleagues in Tokyo, our strong Tokyo office, where we do both outbound investment into the United States and US investment and business ventures into Japan, and happy to talk with you more about what we can do on that front.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, John. Well, so I have one prepared question for each of you, and maybe I'll start with June, back to you. So you oversee inward investment from Japan into the US. Could you just talk about the macro environment and how factors like maybe the recent elections, inflation, trade bottlenecks that we've all heard about in the news, how are those impacting trends for investment, especially from Japan into the US?
Yeah, so the Japanese foreign direct investment trend has really picked up, as many of you know, since 2012, with Abenomics in place. And I think there was the impetus was major corporate governance review. So many of the Japanese companies hold big amount of cash, and they were not necessarily put to work a lot. So when Abenomics was introduced, companies would really push the agenda to make the capital more productive. And therefore, there's been significant investment, I think consistently over 100 billion investment from Japan to overseas locations, and with, of course, US being one of the most significant destinations. What happened recently, I think this year, if you look at this year alone, the investment has stalled a little bit. And I think that kind of relates to what you mentioned about inflation, about market volatility and everything. You know, a big part of the investment in recent year has been M&A activities. And if you're a seller, you don't really want to sell your equity in a very volatile environment, especially when you feel you know, the price may be treated a little bit too cheaply. So this year has been a little bit subdued in terms of investment from Japan overall to overseas destination. But we have a better outlook for the years to come. I think many people are starting to believe that the market low might hit somewhere towards the end of this year. It may already have hit, I don't know. So next year could be a little bit better. And you know, as I said, we speak with many Japanese companies, whether the headquarters in Japan or the subsidiaries here. I think when they restart investment in foreign destination, I think the question is most likely where, and there might be a little bit of reviewing of this question. You know, some other places like China has become a little politically more sensitive, especially with more regulation setting in the United States for production in China and bringing that by way of importing it in this country. Europe has shown itself to be vulnerable in energy intakes. So I think based on the dialogues that we have, it's really the United States where the focus of investment is. So I think maybe next year we'll start to see a significant pickup of investment into the US is our hope.
Great. Thank you very much. Very, very thorough answer. Spot on. Thank you very much for that. All right. So Garrett, I'm going to turn to you. You see inward investment from a pure Utah perspective from all over the world. Could you share a little bit about how it's going from a Utah perspective? And if you have any perspective in particular about what Japanese companies are looking for, of course, that would be interesting.
Yeah, so I should start off by talking pre-pandemic levels. So pre-pandemic, we as a team, our EDC Utah team, we're handling about 120 projects. As COVID came and pandemic picked up, we were all afraid that EDC Utah would be no more. But turns out, as everybody was reshoring and looking at the United States as putting their manufacturing projects, our project level skyrocketed. So we were looking at 160, 170 projects, with about a third of them being manufacturing projects. Currently, over the past year, with inflation and with the market pressures and things like that, we have seen a decrease in the amount of projects, but we're still looking at above pre-pandemic levels. And so, like June was saying, I think our look at the future in terms of the economics in Utah is optimistic. We're still seeing a lot of projects that are looking at Utah, lots of manufacturing projects still. And we even recently have started to see a pickup in our IT and office projects, which is really awesome because those were essentially gone during the pandemic as people moved to remote work. In terms of things, foreign direct investment, Japanese investment, we don't have an accurate or a perfect way to analyze that. There are obviously a lot of Japanese companies here in Utah, think places like Rakuten, and we've got Tolero Pharmaceuticals are all Japanese companies. So we don't necessarily see into what the Japanese companies, how they're looking at Utah. We don't have a specific more than other places, but we do see we're still seeing about 120, 130 projects looking at Utah, and it's an optimistic future to say the least for Utah, especially with our diversified economy here.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Gary. I'm going to actually skip to John Franz. We could just pass it down. John, could you talk about the role of a law firm in the types? Well, first of all, what are the types of investment? We've heard M&A, but there are other types of transactions where money comes into the Utah economy. Maybe some of the roles that the lawyers play, and what Greenberg Trauig is seeing in terms of activity between Japan and the U.S.
Right. Well, we share optimism like June about where we're heading. And particularly since the trade deal in 2019 between Japan and the United States, we have seen an uptick in actual investment productivity, business opportunities in Japan by U.S. companies, and also the investment into the United States. Japan is at the top of the list as far as foreign investment in the United States. Yeah. We love Japan, and Japan loves us as a nation. And it's a great partnership that has existed for decades, a very predictable partnership. Japanese are good for their word compared to maybe other countries and other nations that are not described that way.
Yeah.
And so a law firm in Tokyo that has a global footprint, has an office here in Salt Lake and other offices all over the United States and from Tel Aviv to Shanghai, we offer an ability for businesses to translate what they want to do into success. So for example, if a US company wants to open up operations in Japan, and there are many opportunities, and that will continue to increase with the benefits of this trade deal, that there's a lot of opportunities, and Japan is friendly towards business. Right now, I think the World Bank ranks them at 29th most friendly to business, which sounds okay, but we know the Japanese focus on excellence, and that thanks to the Japan government and groups like JETRO, they've set an overt policy goal to by 2030 be at the top of that list for ease of doing business in Japan. And so there are opportunities there. And yet, despite those opportunities, there are challenges because here in the US, we're very used to at-will employees. If it's not working out, see you later, have a nice day. And that is just not how it works in Japan, where the laws and regulations heavily favor or strongly favor employees. And that's not unique to Japan. I mean, we've been advising companies who have tried to open up operations in Mexico, and there are similar dynamics that is very employee focused. So although there are many opportunities for a US company to bring in products, services, set up manufacturing with reliable partners, there may be some lost in translation type situations where a law firm can help understand and advise a US company about what the labor and employment issues are in Japan.
All right. Well, thank you. That's very interesting perspective on what's critical for success doing business with Japan. Franz, back to you. You did share a little bit of the history, and you shared a little bit of your own advice or perspective. So just wondering if you could add to that, in particular, focusing on what is it that a Utah company should do if they want to be successful from your experience working with Japanese.
I think what I think is important is the very first thing a Utah company needs to know after make a commitment. I think a commitment is usually spelled out money. Many times in America we are short-term oriented, but when you do business with Japan, you should understand that Japanese, for the most part, are medium and long-term oriented. I think we have seen when it comes, and very thorough, when it comes to, we talked about mergers and acquisitions, and there are some companies here today that have significant amount of investments from Japan. But I tell you, it is this personal relationships that has been always very, very in the forefront. You just go over there one time, expect the contract, and it's the personal relationship. I remember Mitsubishi is here in Utah, and they're working on one of the largest energy storage projects in the world. And when we went over to meet the leadership of that organization, so many organizations, but of that one organization, there was focus on ceremony, on getting to know the person, and personal relationships comes first. The other, from a cultural standpoint, what we have learned is in Japan there is a concept called wa, which means group dynamics, group decisions are very important, and the concept of the nail that sticks out gets hammered down is sometimes a concept in Japan. But I'm very, very serious, just like what you said, John. This is one of the major, Japan is one of the major investors here. And we need to take this, and we are taking it seriously. I also would like to recommend those of you that are not going over there yet and doing business, to find a mentor, somebody that has connections, somebody that you can ask, a trusted mentor. That's where the consulate could come in. That's where JETRO comes in. That's where JP comes in, and this network development I find is, especially in Japan, very, very important. And I would like to mention that we have had long-standing relationships, not just as a state, but also, for example, the city of Salt Lake, the oldest sister city relationship in the history of Utah is with Matsumoto, Japan. And some of you might have attended the 24th of July parade, but we always see representative going down that parade with the mayor and so on and so forth. So there. We are so grateful for our friends from Japan, and what I like about it is, and I deal with many countries of the world, is that it is a quid pro quo. In other words, it's beneficial on both sides. It's not just Utah, but also on the Japanese side. So thank you very much.
Thank you for those insights. We do have a few minutes for Q&A from the audience. Are there any questions that you have for this panel? Anyone? All right, I have one follow-up, and then we can move on to the presentation from JETRO. And maybe I'll start with June, but if others have a view on this, I just wanted to drill deeper into investment. We've talked about investment, but at least from my perspective, investment has many facets to it. It's not, it can be a relocation, it can be a merger and acquisition, it could be a passive investment, et cetera. Could you just say your own thoughts on that from JP Morgan's perspective? What forms do you see, and what tends to be the most common form of investment that you see, I guess, would be the question.
So I think historically speaking, the Japanese investment tended to be direct investment into facilities. So, Toyota is a good example. You bring your factories, let's say from Japan to the United States, those 1980s, 1990s type of investment. And I think the trend has shifted more towards buying US companies. So I don't know exactly what the split is, but most likely M&A is now a bigger value of the total investment we see from Japan. And I think you use different type of investment depending on what you try to achieve. For instance, there are many Japanese companies, very interesting, for instance, in the food area, which may not be that, something common in Utah yet, but some brands that used to be very successful in Japan for a long time, but their business model was domestic, and now they're trying out the US market. In this case, you're taking your brand overseas. So there's really no point in investing in a new brand unless you want to have a bigger portfolio. But many companies looking for technology, whether that's supplemental technology to their product, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, what you want is really, identify the right technology for you domestically and acquire this company or any kind of partnership, I would say. What we have seen a little bit rising up as a demand is buying production facilities with people in it. And that's something that we have seen significant shortage of labor force in recent years. So for instance, there may be some successful Japanese companies that have a lot of order backlogs, and their production capacity have just gone to utilization 100%. Now they want to hire people not available, labor not available. So they need maybe investing in an old production facility and rearrange that to their own use and have the people.
And converting it over to their use, at least somewhat. Very good. All right, well, thanks. That's very informative. All right, yeah, we do have a question in the audience. We have time. I'll repeat the question. You could just state it.
With how the recent, I guess, let's just call it geopolitical things that happened last week, we're starting to see, because of new trade, some of those multinationals back to Tokyo, and is there a benefit to setting up an Asian
Yeah, I'll just repeat it for the audience online. Question was, with the changes in the geopolitical environment with respect to China and maybe other parts of Asia, and the new trade agreement as of 2019, are we seeing multinationals kind of pivoting back towards Japan, towards Tokyo as a place for their Asian headquarters? Does anyone here have a view on that? We can certainly get the JETRO team involved, but
I can comment very briefly on that.
Sure.
Because I used to have a job in Japan where I did the reverse. I was serving U.S. subsidiaries in Japan mainly.
Sure.
And at that time, what was happening is a lot of U.S.-based companies, Asian regional headquarters, were moving out to places like Singapore and Hong Kong and what have you, and many times Philippines as well. And I think one of the biggest driver was really Japan was too expensive.
right.
Number one. And also the linguistic part. I mean, you can find English-speaking population much easier in Singapore. So the FX dynamics has completely changed, as you have seen in the last few months. If this is here today and we don't know yet, that might change.
Interesting. So this is not geopolitics. It's not it's FX and cost of doing business. That makes perfect sense. Thank you, John.
Well, on this question, which I think is great, we have observed, as has the world, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, partnering with Sony to establish a semiconductor plant in Kumamoto Prefecture, which is a place where I lived for a very short time. Beautiful place, not close to Tokyo. But that is, I think, that dynamic you're talking about these supply chain problems we have really confronted in our world economy, the unpredictability of other nations' laws. What Japan offers is the rule of law, which, as a lawyer, as a former Justice Department guy, that's very important, because the rule of law, if it's established and understood and predictable, all things flow from that. And that's what Japan does offer. And maybe this is a sign of an option for people. And certainly the US is very interested in not being reliant on other countries like we've gotten a pickle on with this, with chips in particular. Japan is ready and waiting for opportunities like that, and obviously has that capacity. When we were very young, it was ubiquitous to see the Made in Japan symbol on our products. That changed to Made in China. Hey, maybe it's time to go back, and TSMC certainly thinks that's in their benefit.
Great. Excellent question. Yes, one more question.
I would just want to add to what John did some good talk. Real well because
Great. Yeah, great comment. For those of you online, just comment from the audience was that they've seen in doing very large transactions that the level of trust between the US and the Japanese businesses is very high, and it really facilitates closing a deal. Okay, I think, was there what I saw, we could probably squeeze in one more. Yes, ma'am. And by railings, do you mean literally, or are you using the metaphor?
I'm actually saying what is
Oh.
the 407 million that we participate in.
In terms of the, Franz, you quoted the numbers, and I did not research them. Jim, who might be in the room, is often quite good with numbers as well. Do you, Franz, know what the breakdown is in the actual imports and exports between?
Yeah, and I've
you-
got this here, and I'd be happy to share this with you. Yeah, no problem at all. I've got, the current number is we have from exports from Utah to Japan, in 2021, $713 million, and imports 163 million. I will give you those numbers. It's not a problem.
All right. Thank you. Okay, I think on that point, we're gonna wrap up this session. John, Franz, Jun, and Garrett, thank you very much for participating. And I think you're staying with us. Some of you might as well stay for some one-on-one sessions that we scheduled during lunch. And we're gonna pivot at this point then to Taki-san. You were gonna say a few words from a JETRO perspective. If you have any view in particular on this question that we're just talking about, please share it. But anyways, a round of applause for the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today, the building, the Blue Train for Trade Utah Japan conference. And thanks to our co-organizers, World Trade Center Utah and the Consul General, Mr. Mikami, for this, their support and cooperation. I'm Chief Executive Director for Japan External Trade Organization, the office in Los Angeles. So JETRO is Japanese government-related organization that promote neutral trade and investment between Japan and the rest of the world. We are established in 1958 by the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. As you can see, that we have global presence with more than 70 overseas offices in 54 countries, as well as large domestic office network. The Los Angeles office covered Hawaii, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, of course, Utah, the Southern Nevada, and the Southern California. Our current mission is US can be summarized into four general categories. First one is support Japanese small and medium-sized company that establish new opportunity overseas or expand their current business. The secondary, the promote the foreign direct investment into Japan by assisting the US company seeking to invest in Japanese economy. Third one is to promote export of Japan's agriculture and fishery products. This subject is my favorite, as our LA office is in charge of JETRO US Food Promotion Initiative. Lastly, they are establishing the better relationship with the states and cities in our coverage area. Through the outreach and the relationship the building to create greater trade and investment opportunities. I'd like to discuss the importance of Japanese direct investment in US by highlighting some of the facts. I think you will find it interesting. As you can see by the slide, this Japan is #1 total foreign direct investment, #1 creation of the manufacturing job, #1 total value of manufacturing merchandise export from US. Next, the series of slides illustrated this figure. Total Japanese FDI by 2021 was 721 billion, ranking first among all investor countries. The total number of Americans employed by Japanese-owned manufacturing company in the US tops all other investor countries. This slide shows that over 5% of total US export were generated by Japanese company operating in the doing business in US. In Utah, JETRO Los Angeles for many years has supported the small satellite conference. Last September, Governor Herbert led a business delegation to Hong Kong and Japan. We hope to let the support and assistance to future mission from Utah. Japan was the #1 top R&D investor until last year, when Germany slightly nudged in front. Japanese companies have long recognized the US role attracting the world top R&D talent. This recognition has given rise to dramatic increase in funding the last decade. As you can see on this slide, there's much investment going on in the US by Japanese company. In fact, Japan is the third largest foreign investor after the UK and Canada. The announcement you see here are from just 1 month, January on this year. As I previously mentioned, one of the JETRO main activity is to promote relationships and outreach with our trade partners through the collaboration on event, the conference, and trade mission. An example of this has been JETRO's support and participation in the small satellite conference held at the Utah State University. In March 2020, we participated in workforce development and investment seminar at Utah Valley University. Recent survey show that the recruitment and retention of the employees is the biggest concern of Japanese affiliate company doing business in the US. In September 2019, back before travel restriction due to COVID were introduced, JETRO welcomed them, Governor Herbert and Utah mission member to Japan. We hope to assist Governor Cox with any future plan to visit Japan. In Utah, the latest research indicates 89 Japanese affiliated company employed approximately 3,000 employees. We'd like to see those numbers increase. Big famous corporate name in Japan have invested recently in Utah. The Mitsubishi Power, Sumitomo Dainippon, and Panasonic have established business partnerships in Utah. I would like to point out that we also encourage FDI to Japan. The USA last year traded only Hong Kong in total FDI, but was the #1 investor in Greenfield project. In order to better promote the foreign direct investment to Japan by overseas company, JETRO has Business Support Center, which can offer the temporary space, the advice on taxes, hiring practices, the regulations, employee compensations, etc. These services are free of charge and can be utilized by the foreign company by applying at the nearest JETRO office. In my conclusion, I appreciate your participation and look forward to future collaborative projects between JETRO and the Japanese company and the Utah, the private sector and the public sector. Thank you for attention and attendance today.
We have a little time, maybe I'll just ask, are there any questions or did you want to say something? No, okay. Oh, you could also help with answer questions. Yeah, do we have any questions from the audience for Taki-san or Chris? Yeah.
Curious, what other markets
Yeah.
Thank you. I think you made a good point because of the recent tensions between the US, China, and the impact it's having on the Japanese foreign policies, especially because in domestic politics in China, sometimes Japan is a scapegoat. And sometimes there's been protests outside of Japanese corporations. So I think this has been also because of the COVID pandemic, has Japanese companies looking at the US more for investment opportunities. As far as other companies outside, I think someone brought up earlier, what's really going on in Japan is that their population is declining. And this is a big demographic issue because if the population is declining, then the domestic markets for Japanese products is also declining. So June had talked about M&A activity in the US by Japanese companies. The way they feel they're going to be able to grow their economy is through expansion overseas. And as June mentioned, now this investment is taking on more of a let's buy US companies that fit our portfolio. In the food service industry, if you look at Ragu, everybody's probably bought that. But about 8 years ago, that was bought by a Japanese company called Muscon. And you don't necessarily think of Ragu as a Japanese product, but it is. Also, the largest chili manufacturer, Red Chilies in New Mexico, is a Japanese food processing company. So Kikkoman is definitely looking outside of Japan to acquire food companies, and other technology companies in Japan are trying to do the same because that is the way they feel their ultimate growth is going to be internationally. As far as the companies that rank in foreign investment,
out of Japan. Unfortunately, I'm not real familiar with that from our LA office, but I'm sure I can get those figures for you if you want to meet me after the conference.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Very informative. I always think of JETRO as the authority in Japan for any Japanese company thinking about doing business internationally. I've been told that they would not do business abroad without consulting with JETRO. And so I just think of them as outstanding partners to help us access Japan and the Japanese to access these markets. We're going to bring up the next panel, Aaron, Sunny, David, and do we have Kai online? Excellent. Kai, welcome to the event. We'll be with you shortly. If you could just come up and have a seat, no particular order. It'll be much like the last panel. Before we turn to the panel, though, there was a public service announcement that I was asked to give, which is, if you have not yet, would you please fill in the questionnaire that's at your seat? We'd like some feedback on the event and appreciate if you'd fill that in and share it. Inoue-san is collecting them as well as we talk now. Okay, well, thank you very much. Great to have you. We're going to start this. So this session is really about walking the talk. These are companies that are actually doing significant business or have done significant business between Utah and Japan, whether it be joint ventures, sales, or actual acquisitions. And we're super fortunate. In fact, two of the companies that were mentioned by JETRO as having one of the most significant presence here in Utah are on the panel. The Sumitomo Daipon Pharmaceutical transaction is represented here, as well as the JV with Panasonic. So I don't know if that was planned or coincidence, but it made me smile. All right, so maybe we'll start, Kai, with you, make sure we got connectivity. Could you just say a few words about yourself by way of introduction, and then we'll come back to you later with another question.
Sure. Am I coming across?
Just give us 1 second. It's a little quiet. I don't know if we can change that here. Maybe on your side, Kai?
Yeah. Is it better?
A little better.
Is it better? I can get a little bit
Just give us
closer.
1 second. Maybe we'll make adjustments, Kai. We'll come back to you in 1 second, if that's okay.
Okay. Sure. Sure, that's fine.
And Sunny, maybe we could start with you. Just again, a few words of introduction, and then we'll come back for more discussion.
My name's Sunny Sanyal. I'm the CEO of a company called Varix Imaging. It's a Utah-based company. We've been here for about 70 years, and we're in the medical device, medical technology business with a significant amount of business that flows into Japan that's generated. So we're exporting to Japan, Japanese manufacturers. It's a pretty substantial amount of our business presence.
Great. And Varix is one of the few publicly traded companies in the state as well, and one of the larger ones.
So by the numbers, so we're a public company. We're roughly 850 million in revenues. And also to give you a frame of reference, I think Franz mentioned that there's about $700 million worth of export business that happens from Utah to Japan. I think we probably contribute about 200 million of that.
Oh my goodness.
And so our business is largely, we're a net export company, and about 70% of our business is shipped outside the US. So we export 70% of our business outside the US. And about 90% of our business is generated as a result of relationships that are outside the US. So we may ship products all over the world, but it's generated due to some relationship somewhere. So the export nature is very important to us. And Japan, and I can talk more about this later.
Yeah.
There's a huge, long history of our business and our business success that was driven by very specific relationships in Japan. And we've benefited from it for the last 40, 50 years.
Super. Thank you very much. All right, Aaron, if you say a few words, friend of World Trade Center, recently here and now at Fordham. If you could say just a few words of introduction about yourself.
I appreciate it. Japan is a second home for me. I was there did about a 5-year stint, returned in 2019, previously lived there in 2009 as well. Taki-san, what wasn't on in your slides is that Toshiba made about a $20 million investment in Fordham Technologies this year. So they sit on our board of directors. I'm vice president of strategic initiatives at Fordham. I also oversee investor relations. We are a defense and security contractor. We manufacture a drone that defends, protects, and digitizes airspace above critical infrastructure, venues, stadiums, et cetera. We have the World Cup contract. All 8 stadiums in Qatar this month are being defended by our drones. And so Japan is a wonderful place to do business. You know, I think about the personal significance of Japan to me, and it really helped shape my career in a lot of ways, but it's also a great place to do business because the Japanese are hungry, they're innovative, and they want to get out beyond their borders and do business with foreign partners. And so Sonny's evidence of that. He's the 800-pound gorilla in the room today. So thank you for having us, and thank you to World Trade Center, Utah.
Sure. Thank you very much, Aaron. And David, if you could say a few words about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Dave Beers. I'm a serial entrepreneur in the biotechnology space. So I've started several biotech companies all here in Utah. The first one I started was a company called Montagen Pharmaceuticals, which was acquired by a Bay Area company that we actually did a deal with a company in Japan called Eisai Pharmaceuticals. So we spent a lot of time, a drug that we had developed and got approved here in the United States. We eventually got it approved around the world. And our international partner was Eisai. So we spent a lot of time going to Japan, working with Eisai. That company eventually, actually, interestingly, got bought by Otsuka, which is another large Japanese pharmaceutical company. So we spent a lot of time doing a lot of business with Japan. I then left and went to the Huntsman Cancer Institute and was on faculty at the University of Utah, and then started a company spinning technology out of the university that became Tolero Pharmaceuticals. And then we were acquired by Sumitomo Pharmaceuticals, Sumitomo Dainippon Pharma. And I became the chief scientific officer and global head of research for Sumitomo's oncology division. And I had a big group of scientists in Osaka that I worked with, as well as a group in Boston and here in Salt Lake. So spent a lot of time going back and forth. Probably went to Japan almost once a month for the few years after the acquisition that I was involved in working with them. So had a lot of experience over my whole career working with Japanese companies.
Great. Lots to come back to there. And thank you again for making time and making yourself available to this group who might want to emulate some of the success you had with Japan. All right, Kai, we're going to try again with you, and we'll just be quiet. If we can't hear you so well, we'll just be quiet and listen carefully. So over to you to save some introduction.
Sure. Great. Hopefully this is coming across a little bit better. So I'm Keita Yasuda. So I am Vice President of the Smart Mobility Office of Panasonic North America. So I've been working in the US for about a little bit over 10 years right now. So I guess I'm part of the investment that the Japanese company have been making in the US right now. So, as a broader perspective, Panasonic has been, in operation in the US for the last 50 years. And we have roughly over, 10 billion revenue in the US. Majority comes from the big businesses like a battery business and Tesla. But for what we do in a smart mobility is much smaller, but we have a deep relationship with state of Utah, specifically Utah Department of Transportation. So we're working on the connected vehicle technology or connected infrastructure technology to enable road and the vehicle much smaller, much safer, and then less congestions. So that's what we've been working on. So our office is based out of Denver, Colorado right now, but we have a very close relationship with Utah, of course, which is next to Colorado. So I'm very happy to be here in this panel, and I'm apology that I'm not being able to be there in person. But personally, I've been, again, as I said, spent 4 years in college in Colorado and 10 years in the US. So US is my second home, or it's becoming almost like my first home.
Great.
So
well, thank you very much, Kai. And you're coming through loud and clear now. So we'll fix that connection. So don't be worried about that. We'll come back to, obviously you having a partnership with Utah Department of Transportation is very interesting and great for the state. And I'm sure others would like to learn about how they can develop partnerships like that, either on the public sector or the private sector. Let me just, though, go back to Sonny. It's been a while since we heard from you now. You obviously have had great success in Japan. I think you started down this path, but I was going to give you the floor to say a little more. What has led to that success? What was the history, and what do you think were the key lessons learned on how to develop such a great customer base in Japan?
So first of all, our business started in Japan, started with us selling some small products. We'd make X-ray tubes and we would sell X-ray tubes. By the way, Varix is in the business of any technology that uses X-rays. So CT scanners, mammography systems, surgical C-arms, your cath labs that put in stents, anything that's X-ray, your dentist's office, and it goes on and on and on. So we would sell some X-ray tubes in Japan, and then we found we had a customer there, Toshiba Medical Systems. And then it was initially us selling our wares in Japan. Then we had a discussion with Toshiba, and our objectives were the same, which is we're both in the business of saving lives. And we had, in some conversations, this notion came up of how do we create the next generation of this technology? And Toshiba wanted to build a CT system that would be order of magnitude better in resolution at much lower dose. And they wanted components that would be twice the power at half the size and half the weight. I mean, a very, very tall order. There wasn't anything normal about that aspiration. And then we decided that it's worthwhile working together to figure this out. So our relationship with Japan went from being us selling some product in there to a technology partnership where we found a partner that had a very long-term vision. I think someone might have mentioned, I think maybe Franz said that you've got to think about the long term. I mean, you've got to have a 30, 40-year plan if you want to be truly, truly embedded and be successful there. And that's what we went about doing. And so in that process, we worked together. We created this really, really fascinating technology for X-ray sources that led to the development of very high-speed CT scanners that started this whole notion of, you hear 16 slice, 128 slice, 256 slice CTs. The slices are essentially higher resolution, faster, high resolution, things that allow you to peer very deep into the human body and find very, very fine artifacts that give you very early indicators of cancer. So we went towards a technology relationship, and then off the backs of Toshiba, who became our anchor customer in that area, we were able to grow our business. And when we started all these discussions, we were probably less than $50, $60 million in revenues way back, long back. And from there, we've gone up to becoming an $800+ million business globally. But we used what we learned with Toshiba to support Toshiba, for them to be a great partner and customer for us. But then we expanded our business into other parts of Japan, into other modalities, not just CT. So now today where we stand, as a result of that reputation, as a result of us being able to, being a partner who works very well with Japanese companies, virtually every Japanese imaging equipment manufacturer is a customer of ours. And then we've now gone from medical to other areas of imaging using X-rays for inspection. So for example, this obsession with quality and perfection in Japan leads them to do all sorts of things that we don't do here in the US. So for example, all rice in Japan is inspected by using X-rays to figure out, to make sure that there's no heavy metals like cadmium or lead or mercury in fish is inspected to make sure that when they fillet the fish that there are no bones in there. So these are examples of how our business has expanded because of our relationships and the partnerships in Japan. But then we took that from there and then we went to other parts of the world. Wow. So now as a global company, we went from being very small to growing very well in Japan, and now we've been able to apply that elsewhere.
That is such a great story. Yeah. And just not customers, partners, but then even a flywheel for growth around the world. That's so interesting.
And in that process, we learned several things. This whole notion of obsession for quality and perfection, sometimes it gets under your skin because you just can't seem to get it right and be good enough. But that we learned from that. And what we learned was, it's not a supplier customer type of a relationship. When they use the word partner, we tend to use it very loosely, but in Japan, what that means is they're truly married to you. When we have a problem, and there are problems, when you're dealing with technologies, we would get an army, and we still do, a small army of people that come over and work with us side by side in our factories, helping us figure out how to fix it, how to solve it, how to do something better. And it's not about us versus them and who's responsible for what. They're just truly committed to making us successful as a partner.
Yeah, it just reminds me of a story, and then we'll turn to you, Kai, in a second. But I lived in Tokyo as well and had teams working for me. And one of the leaders there in Tokyo who worked for me, he talked about the hot towels that you would get on an airline. And he used that as an example of something that started in Japan, he claimed, on Japanese airlines, and that every airline in the world has adopted as a standard because of their obsession with quality and customer service. So anyways, great story. Kai, I mean, I think that's a good segue to you. You obviously represent the other side of that, if you will, a large Japanese conglomerate that is doing a JV with, in this case, a Utah public organization, UDOT. But could you just comment, how did you get in touch with UDOT? What led to that partnership, and what kind of partnerships might be interesting to Panasonic in the future that might be of interest to the Utah crowd here?
Sure. Yes. We're working on this, technology called V2X technology. It's meaning vehicle to everything technology. So that means the vehicle will connect with other vehicle, or vehicle will connect with the infrastructure. So, our business originally started with the next state, Colorado, state of Colorado. But, we started working on the, creating a smart road along with the I-70. But of course, I-70, connects from Colorado to Utah. So naturally, we started to have the conversation with Utah. How can we make the road much safer and better and less congestions? And then as we started working with Utah, Utah Department of Transportation, we have noticed that Utah is one of the front runner in intelligent transportation system deployment, and had a very bold vision to become one of the safest DOT in the nation. So the partnership really kind of came with matching our vision to make the road much safer and smarter, and then with it as vision. So that's where our the business we started in around 2018-19, and we officially got into contract with UDOT in 2019, and our relationship has getting even better right now. So we are making, as I said, we're making the road much smarter by enabling our devices into the vehicle, so the vehicle will send the information such as the vehicle safety messages, including the airbag deployed, or some vehicle put the hard brakes or lost the traction control. All those safety related information from the vehicle go into the cloud, and we are developing this Panasonic cloud system called the Cirrus V2X platform. And in this cloud platform, so we basically ingest the data and digest it and bring the insight to DOT with Utah, so that UDOT can analyze what's happening on the road, and they can bring some kind of action to make the road much smarter. So this really our technology is really developing together with the effort of the Utah. So we are very happy to have this relationship with Utah, and we are trying to make this business successful, starting from Utah and then bring it to the other state in the nation. So it's truly the partnership that we believe in.
And for that business, or more generally, do you also have partnerships with the private sector? And any advice or comments on how to, from the private sector perspective, partner with Panasonic?
Great. So at this moment, we don't have the firmed up the private the relationship with the private sector yet. But one of the technology working on this, connected intersection technology, meaning how can we make the intersection much smarter and respond to certain things. In this area, we like to have a partnership with the logistics company, freight company, so that when the example is when the logistics vehicle comes in intersections, and then but we can automatically change the timing of the signal, so that the freight will go through the intersection quickly and deliver the product, or deliver anything packaged to the customers easily, right? So if we can find a good partnership with the UDOT, as well as our private sector, such as a logistics, the freight company, I think that would be a great opportunity for us to bring our technology.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, Aaron, I'm going to turn back to you. Could you say a little bit more about the partnership that Fordham has with Toshiba? What's the kind of specifics of it and how it came to be? And what lessons maybe there are from that for the members of the audience?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Sometimes Japan is hard to break into. I know we're here to learn about all the great things about Japan, and there are a lot of great things certainly that we could talk about. But when getting into Japan, there is a way of doing business, and there's a culture that governs the way that business is done. And not knowing how that culture works can sometimes be a hindrance to American companies. For example, and I'm going to get to your question, David, but as I'm putting my audience cap on, and there are some who are probably investigating or exploring Japan as a potential market. You know, I'll never forget when I lived there with Franklin Covey. I was there. I ran our operations in Asia out of Japan. We had our executive come in from the U.S. office, and I had some Japanese investors there around the table, and it was a very high stakes meeting. We were looking to raise money. We had a few other U.S. companies. New Skin was in the room there in Tokyo with us, and but we had some great Japanese firms there. And our executive comes in. He says, "Hey, nice to meet you," and he starts throwing out his business cards around the table. Right? And if you know anything about Japan, you don't do that, right? There's a way that you hand business cards to each other. And so I was like, you know, oh my gosh, they're not ever going to do a deal with us. And the culture has loosened some. You know, they're a little more flexible than they used to be. But if you're strongly considering Japan, invest the time up front to learn how to speak, where to ride in a taxi with your clients, how to hand business cards over. All of those things make a big difference in the relationship that Sonny spoke of. Because when you're courting a Japanese partner, they're in it. I mean, they're 100% committed to you. And so the little things make a big difference over time. And Toshiba was no different. And this is actually to World Trade Center Utah's credit, to your credit, David. Fordham came and approached World Trade Center a couple of years ago and said, look, we need to raise capital. We've just had a successful Series A round, and we're looking to bring on about 15 million more. We had talked to all the venture capital firms, private equity firms. A lot of them here in the state of Utah are software based. They love annual recurring revenue, and hardware is typically not an investment they make. And so David had a contact in Japan who put us in touch with Toshiba. That really started the conversation. Toshiba was great. They didn't come on at 15 million. They came on at 19 million. They believe so much in the product. And what that partnership has been able to do for Fordham is all of the manufacturing, the assembly, all of that happens here. But Toshiba is now the reseller. We white label all of our drone and sonar technologies. We give that to Toshiba, and then they sell it as their own. And so it's, them being able to private label our technology and sell it around the world. And they're doing deals in Europe now, and so to their credit, they are a global organization, and it's been a fruitful partnership thus far. And we're excited to see where that goes. But again, to have those conversations, there's a way that you go about doing this. And Taki-san, if your office is willing, I'm sure that there's some preparation that you do with Utah companies and companies here in the US, the things you should know, right? The top 100 things. It's definitely worth doing your diligence up front.
Great. Thank you very much, Aaron. All right, we'll close up my questions with you, David. We've heard about a lot of success, and I think you have mentioned the success that your company had, Tolero with Japan. But could you give a little more detail on the deal, because it's bigger than anything we've heard so far, and how it came about, and what the lessons learned for you from that work?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that I've learned over time is that and I think Aaron just mentioned, and Sonny did as well, that when you develop relationships with Japanese companies, it's a long-term relationship, and that's how they feel about it. One of the things in our industry, it's hard to think ahead 5 years for us, right? I mean, 5 years seems like an eternity. When I became part of Sumitomo, we were writing what they were calling a midterm business plan. and their midterm was 50 years. I was like, well, what does long-term mean? Because for us, I mean, a midterm for me is like next year, right? Short-term business plan is what I'm doing tomorrow. And, you know, so it's a different mentality. And it's, you know, I've obviously had several experiences with working with Japanese companies and learned that over time. I really appreciate the way that Japanese do business. But we, so with Tolero, we had developed a diagnostic test to allow us to find patients that would respond to a drug that we were developing. And Japan has their own regulatory process that's quite different than the process in the United States. And a lot of other countries, we can sync up the regulatory process. So things that we do in the US will be accepted in large part in Europe. And really in most of the rest of the world, if the FDA says it's okay, then everybody else is okay with it. Japan's very different. They say, you know, we want to prove the safety of pharmaceutical products in real Japanese people. Not we don't take your word that they're going to work, you know, because you tried it in a bunch of people in the US. So it's typical for pharmaceutical companies to look for Japanese partners, and because it's a difficult industry, you know, for us to move into and try to sell directly into the Japanese market from an outside of Japan. So typically most pharmaceutical products are partnered with Japanese companies. So it's quite normal that once you have a program that's got to a certain stage in development, that you look for a partner inside Japan. And so I actually went over, originally spoke at a meeting in Tokyo, and met several Japanese companies and had a consultant with me. And I think this is something that, you know, doing your homework and preparing you. We had a consultant that had spent a lot of time, most of his career in Japan, a US guy that had spent most of his life living and working in Japan. He helped us kind of prepared the companies that we were talking to. And we went there with the intention of finding a partner to work with to develop this particular drug product that we were moving forward. And we came home with Sumitomo being very interested, not just in a partnership, but actually eventually moving to acquire Tolero. And you know, it was a long process. We started in the spring of 2016 and didn't complete. The acquisition happened about a year later, and that's actually quite quick for these types of deals with Japanese partners. But you know, I think it was probably the largest life science deal of a homegrown Utah company. It was around $800 million, which, you know, is a big deal for us. And it's been, like I said, they were in it for the long haul. They've invested, built here in Utah, and continue to have growth happening here. So it's been very successful. Hopefully, I know next month they're presenting at a big international pharmaceutical conference that one of the products that we developed at Tolero looks like it's had some very good results. So we're excited that should be announced here real soon, and excited that that's hopefully paid off for everybody.
Great. Well, thanks for that. All right, we have time for Q&A. Could be Q&A for this panel. I think that's where to start. And then if there are other questions, we can take those as well. Yes, for you. Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, so
Wait,
you know,
the question, could you repeat the question?
yeah. So the question was, what's the biggest opportunity for medical device companies, therapeutic companies, for Utah companies in Japan? And I really do. I think it was mentioned in the last discussion that, you know, one of the ways that Japanese companies are looking when they look, you know, I just told you I went through a process where we were planning the midterm business plan for 50 years. They look ahead 50 years. Japan's demographics are changing pretty dramatically, and the only way that they can maintain and grow what they're doing is really looking internationally. And so I think there are opportunities to partner, and not just partner, but for M&A opportunities. Japan companies typically have been very focused on the Japanese market first, and then kind of outside of that. But if you look now at some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, they're Japanese companies, and they don't just sell in Japan. Takeda is a massive company that sells everywhere, and Astellas, same thing. You know, there's very large companies that are continuing to grow. I think that there's probably going to be some M&A activity amongst Japanese companies that will make them even bigger and allow them to exploit the international markets as well. So, I think Japanese companies remain very viable and very attractive partners to work with in the pharma and medical device space.
Very good. All right, thanks, Clark. And I was just processing the Entrepreneur of the Year when you said David. I was thinking, what did I win? But it was, to be clear, for anyone else who was confused, it was David Bears who won. Congratulations, indeed. All right. Any other questions from the audience? Do we have any online by chance? We haven't offered that up, but if there were any, Rayanne, just let me know. All right, well, I have one more. Think about questions if you have any. I'm gonna, Kai, ask you a question. As the only person on the panel with a Japanese company, I mean, we've heard a lot of advice about how to do business in Japan with Japanese, et cetera. Maybe you could just turn it around, Kai. What behind closed doors are the Japanese saying about doing business with Americans? What are some of the kind of taboos or red flags, things that really kind of undermine the trust and the long-term relationships that we've heard are so important to the Japanese?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And we've been doing the business in the US for 50 years, and I'm by myself working in the US for 10 years. But I still sometimes I still cannot win the right answer. But one of the things that I can suggest is to kind of understand what's the kind of behind in the culture, right? Because if you look at the surface of the culture, the way how we handle a business card, the way how we shake or bow, that's one of the surface about. But what's behind is very important. And one of the very significant portion of Japanese culture is pretty much based on the agriculture, meaning a consistency, creating a rice field over the years. So that's why, the consistency, trust over the long term is quite important to build the relationship. Just, that's why I always use that kind of reference as the agriculture business. Throughout the year, you have to keep the consistency with the people of the village. So that's a kind of fundamental part of the Japanese culture, which has a huge impact to the way how we do the business. And the more one tactical advice that I can say is about the software technology in the US can be very valuable to Japanese company, because Japanese company historically pretty good at the manufacturing or developing a physical thing, with the obsession of the quality or the perfection. But when it comes to the software, especially in the cloud side, creating a very scalable the cloud architecture design, software development is basically Japan is far behind from the US. And that's where actually Panasonic is working together with the team in Japan, more hardware centric versus more software centric from the US. So creating a hybrid model, creating the intersection of the cyber and physical. So I think, especially when it comes to the software side, there are a lot of opportunity for the Utah-based company to work with a Japanese company.
Excellent. Very good insight. Thank you. And on that comment about understanding what's behind the ceremony or what's behind the custom, interesting that you would share that story about the agricultural roots of a lot of the customs. Chris here from JETRO was sharing with me, totally coincidentally as well, the background on bowing. I hope you don't mind if I share, Chris, what you said, but I associate bowing with Japanese customs. And he said, well, it's good to know though what's behind that. And it's a desire to make a personal acknowledgement of the other person's presence, and that to deconflict any kind of risk of conflict. And that's especially important in crowded societies where people were kind of living on top of each other. But just that little extra notion of why are we doing this? It's to acknowledge each other's presence. I think helps a lot, and it certainly adds to the charm of it all, and I think also helps kind of reinforce the desire and the need to do that and to have good relations. So great advice. Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? If not, we can move to our closing remarks. And Rayanne, how are we doing on food? Is it on the way or? Oh, is that right? Okay, very good. So after our closing remarks, we'll have food and time to mingle as well. But any other questions from the audience? Anyone? Yes, please.
On the market, expanding as a part of the process and have quality region and all of that conversation fully with him, which makes the produce the breaking down cancers and other very important diseases. The conversation is, I'm in my hands, I'm ready to do it. It's the man would have
And could, just for me and probably the audience, could you say what NSF stands for? I didn't mean to put you on this.
really important for some reason. Bleach
I see.
due to lack of site. There's only one, I think, molecule that if it could be broken up, it would be considered probably across the board. But the issue is that we have three molecules. Two break up, one isn't breaking up.
Mhm. But it's a concern. NSF it's a risk. It's a concern. The question is that on the radar in Japan, and would manufacturing there be safe from that perspective? Do any of you have a view on that?
I'm horribly underqualified to be able to address that question. All I can say is for every product that we build, the push we get from the Japanese consumer, from the hospitals and from the physicians is to reduce anything that to make an impact in a way that it reduces the radiation dose delivered to the patient. And a part of that has to do with just their obsession for how it then impacts the overall health of them, of their body and themselves. And our customers there have been just obsessed by that. I know it probably has nothing to do with NSF, but then, so for example, if you're treating a patient for cancer with radiation therapy, they're as much concerned about the dose that's delivered to the tumor or the the artifact in there as they are with what does it do on the way in and on the way out. And so these are extraordinarily important topics for them. In terms of manufacturability, or I am totally lost. I'm going to ask David to help me out with this. I really don't have any experience with this, but the extent that you're looking for quality manufacturing, ability to manufacture, certainly there's no shortage of that in Japan, but to manufacture something that has, where there's a risk, a safety risk, I think that might be something you'd have to ask an expert.
Yeah, so I don't know if I can even speak directly to your question, but what I do know is that the quality and safety standards in Japan are as good or better in terms of strictness and the purity profiles that we have to produce in the pharmaceutical world. If FDA is this standard, the Japanese are probably a little higher in terms of the standards that they use for producing pure, safe, effective products. So on the manufacturing side, Sumitomo obviously was part of Sumitomo Chemical, big, large industrial chemical manufacturing company. And, I know we spent a lot of time worried about waste products from manufacturing processes and environmental regulations, which probably exceeded what we would worry about here in the US. So I would guess that if there's questions about manufacturing process, the standards in the US, they're probably exceeded in Japan in terms of what they're looking for in terms of safety and quality.
Can I just ask with the JETRO team, Taka-san or Chris, if she had questions about manufacturers or standards of manufacturers, I assume that's something that they could approach you guys on? Yeah, so maybe during the mingling, approach Chris.
And I would just add that NSF actually has an office in Minato-ku in Japan. So I almost guaranteed that the NSF certification is obtainable there.
That's great. Thanks, Aaron. All right. Yes, one more question or two. You and then Jonathan. Yep. Yeah, please.
So we are a 10-employee company who currently work on high energy density batteries for drones applications on eVTOL. Okay, it's a one direction. The other direction is battery materials recycling. Okay, so for such a small company like us, 10 people, how can we get access to the resource, in Japan, or how can we get the market?
And you're a 10-person based organization here in Utah?
Yes.
And you want to know how to get more access in Japan to research or partnerships?
Yes.
Can I?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
JETRO is obviously who you're going to work with on the Japan side. But first and foremost, you don't have a lot of bandwidth. You have 10 people and you're trying to look beyond your borders. And so going into Japan is a huge endeavor. Capital is oxygen for your organization. I'm going out on the limb here and correct me if I'm wrong. So access to capital that can help offset the cost of going international is probably a huge priority for you right now. A lot of that is obtainable through World Trade Center Utah. Let them help cover some of your travel to get to Japan and meet with prospective buyers, partners, and investors. That's what they're here for. They have a little over $1 million a year that they give back to small businesses. You can pay me later for selling your services, David. So I would start there. But in addition, the gentleman in the back with the red tie, Jim, helps lead a team that does all of the research and analytics on the Japanese market for this sector, for your specific business. So they can tell you how saturated the market is, what similar products are selling for and at what price point. All of that is valuable information to help you make an informed decision. And then from there, we would tee up a conversation with JETRO so they can be your boots on the ground in the country, helping introduce you to these buyers, partners, investors, certification standards, anything else that you need, they're going to be able to advise on. So with that, Taki-san, what would you add to that?
Maybe hand them Mike over to him just for our audience.
Actually, this is my job. So please consult your business. Thank you so much. So please communicate with.
Very good. All right, and Jonathan, you had a question. I'll just give you the mic. We can.
Thanks. Yeah, this is for Aaron. Aaron, you've taken on the new role with Utah Aerospace and Defense Industry. And of course, Japan is in the process of retooling its defense industry and reevaluating its strategic position in Asia and in the world. So what opportunities do you see for Utah-based companies that are defense focused to really grasp onto that and make connections? And really, what types of technologies are going to be interesting to Japan at this stage of the evaluation?
Thank you, Jonathan, for putting me on the spot. I appreciate that. So I do work at Fordham Technologies, but I'm the president and CEO of the Utah Aerospace and Defense Association. In partnership with the governor's office, we've stood up a new association to represent this ecosystem of companies here in the state because we're home to large defense contractors, manufacturers like Boeing, L3 Harris. You know, Utah State, to much people's surprise, has over $100 million a year with the federal government and defense contracts. The NSA has 3,000 jobs here. So Utah's become a hotbed for innovation and entrepreneurship within, the security and defense space. One way that we look forward to working with JETRO and in Japan is through our sensors and radar technologies companies here. Fordham Technology, what people don't realize is that the technology that made Fordham possible was actually bought from a smaller company than Fordham here based in Springville, Utah. And so for some reason, for intelligence and aerospace and defense, we have a lot of companies that you've never heard about doing 10, 15,
Seems like we lost the audio, but thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
With the right ecosystem of people who can help you be successful, that network is going to be your most efficient way to approach Japan in the best way possible. We have a few members of that ecosystem here today, the people who can help you. And I wanted to take a minute to suggest that you reach out personally to these folks as well as myself. Just a few, of course, you've heard from John Huber with Greenberg Traurig. Jonathan Bench with Harris Bricken gave a great question earlier. I'm also seeing Craig Perry with Parr Brown in the back. Good to see you, Craig. But also, and all of them can help you in the legal space. But you'll also see Jason Fowler and Mike May here from RNC International provide fantastic logistics solutions. As well as Devin Taylor and Jared Van Orden from GPS. We can help you with your financing and foreign exchange. Golden Moore is here from Zions Bank. I'm telling you guys, you got everyone you need to know in this room. He can move mountains when it comes to international financing, helping you get the dollars you need to succeed internationally. And I'd be remiss if I didn't include Dan Bruner here from the U.S. Commercial Service, a fantastic partner and one of the greatest internet that works with one of the best international networks that I know. So please take the time here today to network, to get to know folks, and to learn a little bit more about how it is that you can be successful in Japan. From my perspective here at World Trade Center, we're really a platform. For those of you who don't know us, we're a platform for international growth. We're here to help you accelerate that growth. So if you're interested in Japan from a sales perspective, from a sourcing perspective, from a partnerships perspective, your first stop as a Utah company should be here at World Trade Center, where we can provide, as David mentioned, grant funding to help cover some of the costs associated with exploring these opportunities. We provide market research and analysis to help you make decisions, smart decisions about where to go with your time and your investment in your growth. We can provide a network and lots of cool stuff. Lots of cool stuff. Come to more of these events, participate. David, I know that lunch is getting ready, so I think I'll probably keep these remarks to about half an hour. Okay. That's all right. But really grateful to have the participation of you today and honored to have JETRO and other representatives from the government of Japan here. Please take the time now to network as lunch gets set up. I look forward to speaking with each and every one of you.